Good Monday morning. We're 2 minutes past the hour of 10 o'clock right now. Randy Roberson with you on KRIM's Community Spotlight. And this morning, we've got a special guest in the studio here that I'm really anxious to talk to. I've had a chance to interview a gentleman that goes by the name of Spike. And Spike is with Bikers Against Child Abuse. And these are keepers of the children. And I've had a chance to interview Spike once before, and I have to say, Spike, I'm super, super impressed with everything you're doing. First of all, thanks for being with us this morning.
Well, Randy, thank you, and thank you for letting us talk on KRIM about our organization.
Sure. Now, for people that aren't familiar with BACA, again, Bikers Against Child Abuse, give us the Reader's Digest condensed version. What's this all about?
Yeah, so this is an organization that started out 25 years ago in Provo, Utah by two clinicians. It was two clinicians that learned that their office work with these abused kids wasn't enough for some of them, and that they needed more intensive help. That would involve regular visits and really more empowerment work in their environment and not necessarily just in the office environment. And so 25 years ago, we started with just a few guys working with a few kids in the Utah area, and now we're in 49 states and 22 countries. So an international organization with a singular mission to empower abused kids.
And you know, it's got to be encouraging for these kids, because I mean, if all of a sudden you have to have someone kind of stepping in on your behalf, having some rather large biker dudes with leather showing up, you know, that there's a you know, quite honestly, an intimidation factor there that I would think would be quite effective.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily intimidation what we're going for. The biker part of it, Randy, is really focused around most people realize that a group of bikers treats each other like family.
Sure.
And so the concept with Bikers Against Child Abuse is we take a child who's in crisis mode, and we can talk about that criteria a little bit later, how we determine that. And we take this child that is in crisis mode and we welcome him into our biker family. We give him a road name, we give him a vest to wear, we take him on a brief motorcycle ride if the child chooses to take it. We give them some other things to remind them that they're now part of our family, and just like I watch out for my brother and my sister, we're going to watch out for you.
Gotta love it, gotta love it. And now, you know, so that's a little bit of the what. Now, and I mean, I think I can presuppose your reaction to the next question, but why?
Yeah, most people have no idea of these numbers. I know I didn't when I started working with this organization 7.5 years ago. There are over 50,000 reported cases of child abuse in Arizona every year.
50,000.
50,000. And it's been above 50,000. These are DCS numbers, Department of Child Safety, the Arizona organization focused on this. It's been above 50,000 for 8 years. And across the U.S., it's over 3 million.
That's astounding.
It is astounding. And the statistics roughly work out this way. It's easier to understand, I think, when we think about just one in whatever numbers. So 1 in 4 girls by the time they're 18 will be physically, sexually, or mentally abused in their home to the level that we would consider abuse. For boys, it's 1 in 6. And actually those numbers have been trending up. So it's 1 in 3.7 girls and 1.55 boys by the time they're 18.
That's just that's shocking. In a word, I can think of a few other words, but probably shouldn't share those on the radio. You know, it's got to be gratifying for you and for the other members of BACA to see the difference you're making. You mentioned that, you know, you bring these kids on as kind of a member of the biker family, and with many of them experiencing, you know, certainly a rather tumultuous situation at wherever they call home now. And that's got to be huge for them, but it's got to be very heartwarming and encouraging for you.
It is. There's a few edges to that, though.
Sure.
When you're dealing with child abuse every day, we have to be very careful as an organization to control the poisonous information that comes into us. So over 25 years, we've learned that we only have one person in each chapter that understands what happened to that child. And this goes for confidentiality as well.
Sure.
And then the board votes on generic information that that one person has confirmed. The information that they're confirming it is that the abuse has been reported to authorities from a therapist or a counselor or someone trained to determine it, that that child is still in fear, and that the child is no longer living with the perpetrator. Those are the only three things that that person is checking. They'll come to our chapter executive board and we'll just give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If she confirms, if he or she confirms those three things, it's always a thumbs up. And from there on in, that child is with us. 24/7, we will have their back. We accompany them to court. We assign 2 trained members that have been FBI background checked to be available to that child around the clock. And then we'll help pay for their counseling fees.
That's beautiful. Now, you mentioned that you accompany them to court, and I would think, certainly there's a lot of different twists and turns to the story, but when it comes to a young boy or a girl who has been abused, and you said, either physically, mentally or sexually abused, that there's a lot of different elements just in that, but when it comes to going to court and having to testify, that's got to be really overwhelming for some of these kids, and what an amazing time to have you all, in there alongside of them, providing that moral support.
Right, and it's really well said, Randy. It's the most intense time for that child, and oftentimes it's the first time that they've seen the perpetrator since the abuse was disclosed, and it's pretty well known in law enforcement circles that the parking lot of a court in a highly emotional domestic violence or a child abuse case is the most dangerous place, because everyone's converging on that one location around the adjudication of a matter that's very close to each of their hearts. And so it's very important to us that the child feels safe on the way to court, through the process of getting to the courtroom, within the courtroom, where we have a lot of support from bailiffs and the judge, and of course the prosecutor, and then that they feel safe and comfortable after they've testified or read their impact statement on the way home. And so we have processes built around each of those. In fact, today our chapter, the White Mountains chapter, is escorting one of our kids to court as we speak. And there'll be 8 people on that ride, 4 bikes in front of that car, 4 bikes behind. When that young child walks into court, she'll be encircled by her family and our group. Her 2 primaries that were assigned will be standing next to her, and we will put her in a safe room until it's time for her to go do her thing in the courtroom. And if she doesn't want to see the perpetrator, we have ways where she doesn't have to see that person.
Boy, that's just amazing. Now, how long have you been involved yourself, Spike?
Just 7.5 years. I retired. I was fortunate enough to retire early in life, and so I started working with BACA in 2013.
And about how many kids would you personally say that you've been involved with this kind of service for?
Yeah, so I've been a primary. We work with hundreds of kids a year in this state, and I've been a primary now to 38 of them.
Wow.
So we get a lot of phone calls at 2 a.m. in the morning. Because the nature of the case that we are talking about with the criteria that I gave you is these kids oftentimes are afflicted with sleeping problems,
Sure.
Night terrors. Perceived fear is equal to real fear in a young child that's been molested like these have been.
Right.
And so there's a lot of intensive work that takes place up front. We estimate that we put hundreds of man hours into each child, and in some cases it's thousands of man hours. And you can see how those build up when we have 8 brothers and sisters taking one child to court. That's 4 hours long. So you've just put 32 man hours on one court visit.
So now you talk about the being the primary. So you're the one, as the primary physician, you are the one that's actually having the verbal interaction with this child and trying to confirm what has or has not happened and the criteria that you mentioned earlier. and then the others are there that come along are there for that additional physical support, just going into the courts and back out again.
Yeah, it's similar to that. So the child liaison's the one that confirms all the information, and that's certainly not me, and it's not the primaries for the most part. It's a special person that does the entire intake process. And then we have the entire chapter. We did a level 1 in Payson yesterday. I think we had 22 bikes come in for this child, and we all welcome him into our family. And we go through a 45-minute celebration with him about being in our family. During that process, we introduced 2 primaries to that child, exchange numbers, and there's a bond that gets built over time. It's our job as primaries to make sure that that child is getting stronger and stronger so he can go testify, that they can start to live like a normal child again, and then we look forward to paying for his counseling once we get him out of fear mode. It goes back to Maslow's triangle. So at the bottom level is shelter and food. Just above that is safety and security. By definition, we're taking kids in that are in those lower 2 levels. And our job is to rise them up to cognitive thinking level at the pinnacle of the triangle, and then pay for that counseling if they don't have access to it.
About how many bikers are involved in the White Mountain chapter?
So in White Mountains right now we have 12 people. We're a brand new chapter. So we've worked to develop it for the last 3 years, and we became a full chartered chapter in April. And we have 12 people now, and we cover 37,000 square miles. We cover from Payson north to Utah, and Payson east to New Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're busy.
That's a lot of bike riding.
Right, yeah, we're busy.
Gotta love it. Now, and I assume that this is male and female bikers involved. And when I'm assuming, and you know what they say about that, but I'm assuming that when it comes to a young girl that's been perhaps sexually abused, obviously the interaction with a female is going to be critical.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So in terms of an organization, we're not a motorcycle club. Technically speaking, we're a 501c3 charity,
right?
But we ride. It's a requirement in this organization that people ride, and whether that's a woman or a male, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And as you suggest, and very correctly, women are probably the most important people in Bikers Against Child Abuse, because so many of our cases deal with young abused girls that have just recently disclosed. And it's a little tough if myself and Sasquatch, who's 6'8" and goes 370, are the first people to step up to that child. We have some very strong women in our organization, and they'll take the lead on that, and most of the time the guys are 20, 30 feet away, or maybe even across the street.
Right.
Just depends on the need of that particular child, but well said, and women are very important in this organization.
So what got you involved to begin with? I mean, when did you first learn about this, and what made you say, hey, I think that's something I'd like to get into?
So my first involvement, like we talked about earlier, was just in the beginning part of 2013. I had 2 extended family members that were unknown to each other, my wife's side of the family and my side of the family, that disclosed to us that they had been abused. And I really had no idea what to do. I had no idea what to do. And so as we started to learn the process, and perhaps we even saw some cracks in the process, which I can explain in a minute, I decided, wow, there's got to be more support for these kids. And I started looking, and I've ridden since I've been a young kid, and always had an interest in riding. And then I figured out I can be part of a solution for a horrific problem, and I get a ride and join a brotherhood and a sisterhood that truly built on a pretty righteous mission.
Boy, very righteous mission.
Yeah.
So as far as how this is all done, obviously you've got to have some pretty tight communications with the legal services, the courts, things like that, and I'm assuming that BACA, again, Bikers Against Child Abuse, has been working to build those relationships over a long time.
We have, and it's very important to me. I consider the roles in the chapter that deal with the agencies that refer children to us as the most important job. The most important job. And so we work with advocacy centers like the Navajo Family Advocacy Center based in Sholo. We work with Gila County's Child Help Organization. We have relationships with all the police departments. We have relationships with therapists who specialize in sexually abused counseling or abused child counseling. So across the board, we work with our mission. One of the lines in our mission statement is we work with everyone who's already in place to help abused kids. And so we're reaching out to all of them. Before I started working in this organization, I had no idea of the number of government homes that are housing abused kids. There are actually many of them right here in the White Mountains area that we work with. There's one that I'm thinking about in the White Mountains area that houses 18 boys and girls, and they specialize in sibling groups, and which is very hard to place siblings and try to keep them together. So we work with the Department of Child Safety, and we work with, again, anybody who's willing to help us.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Now, in some of your promotional material, you know, it makes sense. It says, "We make a difference." We have documented the following behaviors in the children that we support, things like improved self-confidence, diminished regressive behavior, increased feeling of safety, empowerment to testify, better communications, reduced feeling of guilt, decreased negative behaviors, a sense of belonging, acceptance, independence, and much more. I mean, these are huge when you think about the typical reactions that kids would have in this kind of situation if they're you know, just left to their own you know, abilities or whatever. There are problems with the kid feeling like maybe guilty that they deserve this or they brought this on, things like that. I mean, that's what a terrible road for them to have to travel by themselves.
Yeah, I agree. There's a very important underlying theme to that. The power's been taken away from that child by the perpetrator. So one of the goals that we learn in our training is everything we do is to give the power back to that child. When that child says no to something, unless it involves health or safety, it's a no. We don't sit there and probe on that. That's kinds of behaviors that a perpetrator has used to groom them. Regarding all those phrases that you just used, there's a study done by several doctors, PhD researchers, that's been published, that's available on our website. It was conducted over 10 years. That website is BACAworld.org, BACA world.org, and you'll see this research report. Since we work with so many governmental agencies, sometimes they want more, you know, more solid foundation on the actual results and the research. We understand that we're working with their most precious commodity.
Sure.
We treat them the same way, and they just want to make sure that this works. Others are more experientially motivated, and so if there's a counselor or someone in the governmental areas that work with kids, we'll invite them out to some of our events, and we'll let them see us working with kids. Any way that we can reach out to them to let them know that we only have one mission, and that's to empower that child and make it feel safe, we'll do it.
You know, again, going back to some of these huge differences you're making, you know, you also list better communication. I would imagine that a lot of these kids that suffer this kind of traumatic experience you know, probably tend to kind of fold back in on themselves and suddenly don't communicate much at all.
Yes, I would, you know, this is a rough estimate, but 40 or 50% of our kids, when we first start working with us, can't look you in the eye, won't get more than 2 feet away from their guardian or government home worker, whoever that might be, and they're totally shut down. And that's what you would expect with a child that's in crisis mode. But as you start to bring them out and they learn to trust, and they learn boundaries with adults, and they feel involved, they open up and they just become kids again. It's amazing to me how resilient kids are. They, with the right support, man, they can really bounce back. And that support is us making sure they feel safe and included, and with professional counseling help, because we're not trying to provide that.
Right.
And then conversely, kids that don't get support, they're much more likely to abuse. The suicide rate is high. Self-harming rate and drug abuse rate is very high. So it's a teetering situation where we need to make sure we get these kids help.
Well, that's where I was going to go next, because you've noticed a decrease in negative behaviors, and you mentioned kids that self-injure themselves,
Mhm.
or eventually, perhaps get into alcohol or drug abuse, just to, I guess, deaden the pain and
Mhm.
that type of thing. I mean,
Yep.
these are all typical behaviors of a kid that doesn't have the kind of support that BACA provides.
Yes, absolutely. I will tell you that in so many of our fractured families today, and I don't really have a comment about that, it's just the way our society is right now. We have a lot of mixed families, fractured families. Oftentimes, new members are joining that family that may have bad designs, but yet the family may be financially dependent on them, emotionally dependent on them in some segment of the family. And when the child finally discloses to their guardian, many times the guardian won't even believe them.
Oh, man.
And so, can you imagine the isolation of a child who's been continuously abused? They finally get up the courage to disclose it, and they're told that they're lying.
And now they're really alone.
And now we see that over and over again.
Well, God bless you for what you're doing. The other thing that you mentioned, and I think it bears repeating, is that these kids are invited into becoming part of a family where, obviously, very quickly they sense that this family is a safe family.
Right.
And I mean, what a huge transition that has to be for some of these kids.
It is, and for many times, it's the first time that someone's just showed up for them. So there are a few other organizations in the country that will focus on helping a family, biker organizations. And we support all of them, we love what they do, but their mission is much broader than ours, providing financial support to the entire family, or providing intensive help to drug abusers in those families and so forth. The reason why we've exclusively focused on the child is it makes a very strong point to them. The only reason why we're here is for you, and it allows us to hyper-focus on as many of the kids in crisis as we can. Out of the 50,000 plus kids that have reported child abuse each year in this state, and think about how many haven't been reported.
Yeah, really.
I mean, there are large segments of our state that don't report. Some religious communities, some Native communities, and not pointing them out per se, but
Sure.
they just aren't reported in those numbers.
Everybody's trying to cover their tracks.
That's right. And so our job is really to focus on the most abused that we can make a real difference with.
Wow, that's amazing. This is obviously something that requires a lot of time. The numbers of children that you serve is astounding, and so obviously, I'm going to say I'm assuming, but I think it's a fairly safe assumption that monetary donations to this cause have got to be critical.
They are, and they're critical in only one way. We're a 100% volunteer organization. Our international president, his name is Pipes, lives in Tucson. He works in the counseling field for 8 hours every day, and then he comes home and does this all night long.
Wow.
Because he's responsible for the growth of BACA across 22 countries, and you can only imagine the kind of issues that he's dealing with day in and day out. So no one's paid a penny in this organization. When we have a brother or sister that needs to go to Italy or Greenland or New Zealand to help a chapter, they'll get a very small per diem to just sustain them for that period, and it doesn't even cover their expenses, and then they come back. So our monies go directly to our mission exclusively, and it generally costs us about $350 per child over the longer term. Some of that is the regular interaction we have with them for years. We bring all of our kids back, the active ones and the ones that are already on the road to healing, and we call those inactive cases. We bring them back for a winter party and a summer party because it's so powerful when kids help kids.
Sure.
And the newest child will come walking into that meeting and say, wow, these are all BACA kids, but that one's having fun and that one's having fun. Maybe I can have fun, right? So we just have to sit along the walls.
Well,
And
I'm sure it also really helps them to realize that they're not the only ones that have been going through this kind of trauma.
there's a lot of awareness that happens there. And then we pay for the counseling. We will assist with that until we can get them into Access or some other counseling program. One of the other important things we do, Randy, and it really is dependent on the child's needs, is provide alternative therapies through professional providers. So if there's just a really damaged young child that's having a hard time coming out of the shell, sometimes doing equestrian training, working with a large animal and learning how to interact with that, and that you have a say with this large animal, helps them.
Right.
With others, going to karate or something like that so they can build up their self-esteem and learn some self-defense techniques and learn how to speak out, right? And be able to say no very clearly. So there's all kinds of alternative therapies that we'll pay for through professional providers in the cases where we think the child needs it and the guardian thinks that the child needs
Well, I
it.
think that's really interesting too, because let me just pull a number out of my hat. 10-year-old kid has been sexually abused and is now interacting with BACA for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And you get them this year maybe through the whole court system thing and everything, but that's, you don't just quit once you get them through the courts.
No.
You keep that relationship.
We do. We keep that relationship in a in whatever fashion the child wants through the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
And if they reach 18 and their case isn't fully adjudicated, they remain a BACA child until that happens. And then once they've reached 18 and say their court case is completed, or they're 22 and then the court case completes, then they just become BACA friends. Right? And so that we never really let them loose.
Now, what about the person who's out there that says, well, gosh, I ride, and this sounds like an amazing thing to get involved with. You looking for more volunteers?
We're always looking for more volunteers, but I'd say think very carefully.
There might be more to this than you
Yes,
think.
it's a high commitment organization. Yes, we definitely need people that have a heart for our kids and who ride. And the process works like this. We have monthly meetings right now in the White Mountains chapter. We meet in Show on the second Sunday of every month at 1 o'clock. And we ask you to come to several of those meetings. You can learn about us, we can learn about you. Eventually you'll be asked to take an NCICS background check, an FBI background check. And
That just makes sense.
yeah, and we do that through field print. And if there's a conviction for domestic violence or a conviction of any kind of child endangerment charge, then we can't have you in our organization. Believe it or not, almost anything else will go as long as you're not actively doing it.
Right.
And we're gonna have our eyes on you for the next 15 to 18 months as we train you. And you're not gonna have interactions directly with kids as primaries until we vote unanimously that we feel like you've learned what you needed to learn and that we trust you with the child. And then even then, we have over the 25 years learned the process that we always have to have 2 patches with the child that are not related with each other at any time. So whether it's in court or a child visit, other interactions, we make sure that we have 2 independent patches that are working with that child. And then we write, after every interaction with the child, contemporaneous notes and send them in to our child liaison. So that's a matter of record as to what we think happened.
So if people want to find out more, we're about out of time, but if people want to find out more, what's the best way for them to go about that?
Yeah, 2 things. First of all, and probably most importantly, is our referral number for a child that you think might need help. We call it the Arizona State Helpline, and that number is 877-235-7268. And this goes for a child that's in Arizona or anywhere in the world, we will get to the right person. You'll be directly connected to the chapter in Arizona if the child lives here. We will do all the backroom work to make sure that the chapter that's involved and the child that you referred to us gets involved, and we'll take care of that for you if it's outside of the state. If you'd like to learn just more about BACA, or you're interested in perhaps doing this work with us, call me at 480-586-1225.
Spike, with Bikers Against Child Abuse, BACA, God bless you for what you do, and I mean, what an amazing cause. And I'm always just encouraged when I talk to you, and that with these kids that have got to feel like they're at the end of their rope, that, I mean, no one understands and they don't know if they can talk to anyone. And I mean, to have you guys show up, that's got to be huge in a very beautiful way.
Well, thank you, Randy.
You bet. Keep up the good work. And again, if you'd like to find out more, you can give them a call at their main number, again, 877-235-7268, or you can contact Spike directly at 480-586-1225. And you can get more information by just going online and checking out bacaworld.org. That's BACA world.org.